Welcome, everybody. Boy, are we excited to kick this off today. We're going to be talking about a real story. This story is such a great transformation. We'll get into that in just a minute. You know me. I'm Gabe Larson. I'm the Vice President of Growth over here at InsideSales.com, company leading and helping sales teams build pipeline and close more deals, all with artificial intelligence. Today, we're going to be talking about how to build a digital sales and marketing team from 0 to 300 in 30 months. We got a special guest, and I'll introduce him in just a minute. But before I do, couple housekeeping items. You will be able to have this on demand for a few days after this session. We will send it emails, so do watch for that if you got to leave just a minute early. I want this to be interactive. So does Sid. And so if you can right now, open up your chat box. Should be a little square thing there. You click on it. Tell me your name and where you're coming from. That's kind of what we want to see from you, just so we can make sure we know who is on and what is going on from that perspective. Perfect. Yep, we got John King, Minneapolis. Oh, we got Capital T. Hardy coming from Houston. Oh, it looks like some of you also putting it in the Q&A. We got Frank Thomas coming from Atlanta. David, Bruce, perfect. Mac, there you go. Perfect. Tim, Danny, welcome, welcome, welcome. So again, please continue to throw that questions in the chat or in the Q&A, as we want to answer your questions about a real life story of how Sid and team have transformed their company in partnership with InsideSales.com. Oh my goodness, we got Mohammed coming from Egypt. Thank you, Mohammed. Thanks for joining. All right, so with that, how's that for an introduction, Sid? We got you all team. So I'm going to let Sid Kumar introduce himself. But again, Sid, thanks so much for joining. Take just a second to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Really good to be here. I'm excited to share the story with you. And as Gabe said, let's make this interactive and have a good discussion.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. Been in the high-tech industry over 15 years. So currently, as Gabe mentioned, what I've been doing is really leading the digital go-to-market transformation here at CA Technologies. And for those of you who don't know who CA Technologies is, we're a $4 billion plus enterprise software provider around really digital transformation solutions across organizations, across verticals, candidly, and across the world. Been a very interesting journey, which I'll share with you in more detail. I've been here about 13 years. I've had leadership and operating experience across a number of disciplines across the customer life cycle. So demand gen teams, inside sales, customer success, renewals, and started my career in finance and operations, and have some experience with venture capital, PE, and investment banking. So a bit of a non-traditional route, which I took to get here, but I think what I'll share with you is I think some of these perspectives have really helped in terms of shaping the journey and taking us where we need to go.
Perfect.
All right.
Yeah, let's get into the story. And Sid, I've got a couple questions already that I'll throw out, but why don't you start and we'll get into it.
Sounds good. All right. First, what I want to do is just set up the context here. And I'm going to talk to you really about what we've been doing over the past 4 or 5 years, but it's in the context of what the market dynamics are and why did we decide to make some of these changes and pivot the organization. So, one of the stories that's really near and dear to my heart, as we've gone through and seen digital transformation is the Blockbuster Netflix story. And this story, resonated really with me because, as a kid, I remember going to Blockbuster every Friday night, choosing out a VHS cassette of the latest movie or getting a video game. And it just became such an integral part of my life growing up, as a kid. And just seeing the story unfold over the past, 20 years of how Blockbuster became, irrelevant from being indispensable, really over the course of that time period because of choices they made and didn't make. And a lot of those had to do with digital transformation. It had to do with how were they going to create a differentiated experience with their customers, their end users, that was going to keep up with how people were expecting to get value from them in a changing market landscape, which was obviously driven by the internet, driven by social, mobile, you name it. And then here you look at Netflix, who, didn't exist, until 12 years after Blockbuster was founded, and now, has a massive valuation and continues to grow, continues to self-cannibalize itself, and, getting into the content business and just getting constantly on its toes in terms of what's next and paving the path forward. So this example is, I think we can all relate to, or you can choose another one in an industry of your choice that's played out like this. And I think it was a real sort of wake-up call to this whole consumerization of B2B is what caused us to pause and think differently about what's happening in the enterprise and how do we need to be thinking about our portfolio and how we go to market in a very sort of differentiated manner.
Yeah, I mean, is that couple questions coming in, Sid? I mean, one of the things you guys have been around, how long is CA been around?
Yeah, 40 plus years.
40 plus years. Just real quick on that. I mean, as you go 40 plus in all the digital, I know that's going to be part of the conversation today, but has there been a couple things that have kind of rocked the boat and said, we do have to change. We have to be like this Netflix where we've got to see things differently, compelling events, or was it just kind of the tide of the industry as it's going?
I think it was a tide of the industry, but also we were seeing and feeling it from our own customers in terms of how they wanted to experience our technology, how they wanted us to engage with them around that technology pre, during, and post-sale. So it was listening to the buyer sentiment. It's called the buyer's journey, not a seller's journey, right? So we had to really listen to our buyers. I think the interesting perspective we bring to it is 40 years is effectively the inception of IT. And we've seen, we've seen every wave, but I think the amount of change in this past, 5 to 10 year period has been just massive. And I think it's had a lot of go-to-market implications due to, cloud and subscription and what that's brought to the table.
Love it. Love it. All right, man. Yeah, continue. Jump in.
All right. So, you take what's happening there and then you look at it across industries. And the other sort of alarming stat that I had come across was that half of the Fortune 500 firms since 2000 are gone. And if you sort of project this, isn't that crazy?
That's just crazy.
Yeah. It's 1 in 2 companies are gone, in less than a 20-year period. And I think if you look back at why, a lot of these companies either, again, saw signals, didn't act on them, or, saw signals, did act on them, but not fast enough. But this notion of digital transformation is going to come up over and over when you start looking across industries and looking at where companies are getting marginalized versus, deciding to pave the path forward. So that's just a little bit of context, and it just got us really thinking. It's not that it was just these examples, but we sit across, our customer base is across the Fortune 500, and we see customers across industries as a result. And we started seeing and hearing that feedback around we need to think differently about how we engage, but also at the same time, we pivoted our portfolio quite a bit to really be much more oriented around helping customers solve these exact problems. And I'll get into that in the next section. Okay. So now let me dive into our digital go-to-market transformation. And I'll tell you this, I mean, we started this really by looking at what are the needs of the buyer. So before we started talking about go-to-market, we really need to think about what are the solutions we're even going to sell? What is the value proposition that we are offering to the market? And for really a majority of our history as a company, we were very, oriented around infrastructure. We were oriented around really more optimization around the data center. And what we saw was there's a real opportunity to get closer to the application, closer to revenue generating applications that are driving digital transformation, changing the customer experience that companies want to have, the dynamic and the relationship they have. And that can really be fueled by this whole notion of helping companies become modern software factories. So if you take, a bank, there's a CEO of a large bank that often says, we are a technology company with a banking license. And you can play that across industries where, the application now becomes the conduit for customer experience and engagement. And we, as a result, organically and inorganically, really pivoted our portfolio to be much more holistic from, idea to inception and everything in between in this notion of modern software factory. And also making sure these solutions were tailored to provide that type of experience. Try and buy, credit card transactions, how they want to actually procure those as well. So it started with understanding.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, quick question just came in. I think it's interesting. It's from John. He just said on the QA box here, a lot of stats out there about, buyers being, 60%, 70% down the buying journey. And you're kind of alluding to optimizing around the buyer journey. Is that something you guys adhere to or believe? And I know you were actually going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, Sid, but what's your quick thought on buyers being X% down kind of the buying journey before they talk to a sales rep?
That's absolutely right. And I'm actually going to cover that. It's a great question. It dovetails right into this. It's absolutely right. The expectation is that the digital content that you have out there is getting richer and richer. So by the time they do want to have a in-person interaction and give up meaningful portion of their time or day, it's got to be a really value-added conversation. And that has a lot of implications into enablement. It has a lot of implications into how you think about orchestrating that experience. I'll cover that in a couple of slides.
Got it.
So now I painted the picture. We had to sort of rethink about our portfolio, our value proposition, and now it's how do we get that value proposition and articulate that value proposition out to the market. So with us getting into these other markets around the entire application lifecycle, got us into a $40 billion plus market. And the way we were going to go after that broader market was not just through a traditional direct sales model, but how do we leverage the channel? How do we leverage digital techniques to draw people in and engage with them so that we not only improve our customer experience, but get much more breadth in coverage across all of the customers and prospects we thought would be able to take advantage of this value prop.
Love it.
So with that, so you think about product and you think about go-to-market, which has like the sales and marketing. And I'm going to dive into really the sales and marketing side, assuming you have a value prop that resonates with the market. How do you get it out there? How do you scale it? We thought about this across 3 pillars. First is figuring out and understanding, just going back to the question that just came in, right? Really understand what is your buyer's journey. And if you're a single product company, this might be easier to do than if you're a multi-product company like we are. There's nuances depending on the stage of the product, the pain point you're trying to solve, but it's really understanding who are you going after within what types of organizations? How do they want to buy? Go talk to them. How do they want to engage, and where do they see value in a digital interaction versus a human interaction? I'll dive into this in a little bit more detail. The second is, once you figure that out, then you can really lay out what your digital go-to-market structure looks like across marketing and across sales. We'll dive into that as well. And then last, once you have your buyer's journey lined out, your go-to-market strategy established and structured, it's then identifying what are the key pillars to go drive execution. I call it the RUBRIK'S Cube. It's a 3x3, which was a useful framework in the context of how I thought about it. In the context of CA, and hopefully it'll resonate with you depending upon where you are in your journey. Make sense, Gabe?
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's dive into it. We will go 1, 2, 3.
Let's do it. All right, so let's dive into the buyer's journey. So the buyer's journey itself has not changed at all in quite some time. It's people want to get educated. They're going to do their research. They're going to go make a choice on what they want to go do. What really has changed is the interplay of digital and personal touch points across that buyer's journey. So this concept of 70% or 2/3, depending upon what stat you look at, the buyer's journey could be very digital very much digital for the first 2/3, and then start getting interlaced between digital and human. Although what I'll tell you is there's a lot of variability in this, and there's not one single answer to this. There are some solutions we have where it's almost entirely digital until the very end, where we're helping the customer close the deal. Because we have a long-standing relationship, it's an expansion opportunity. So there may not be very much digital at all until the very end, and it's almost self-guided. In another case, if it's a land deal in a new market, there's a lot of research that goes on early on, and there's a lot of handholding that also needs to go on earlier on. So you have to understand how much time, what type of assets do you need to give the buyer to become self-informed, and at what point does it make sense for you to introduce a sales rep, or it may be a technical sales rep that can just help them get up and running on a trial, and you don't introduce a sales motion until much further along. So this is one that's going to be unique to your situation, but I think it's very important to understand how do your buyers buy and how do they want to interact with you. This becomes really the blueprint for everything else afterwards. If you don't get this right, everything else gets a little.
Got it. A couple questions came in on that, Sid, just to see if we can clarify. I mean, did you guys actually, and it's a little tactical, but it sounds like you guys did actually try to map that out. Any advice on doing that for other people? Like, how do you map out your buyer journey or your customer journey? Just get in a room with a couple people, hand sketch it. This is actually coming from Denise out of Florida. Denise, tactically, any thoughts on building out or actually mapping that?
Yeah, I think it's important to not try to boil the ocean here. I think this is an iterative process. And I think it's, if you have a solution that you're trying to bring to market, go talk to your customers. I think that's the best place to, is go talk to your customers, look at what your competitors are doing. That's always a good place to look to see how they orchestrated their buyer journeys between digital and, where do they get, either BDRs or salespeople involved. I think it's really one of those things that's a co-created type of exercise to with your customers, with your sales folks. Go talk to your sales folks and say, what are the types of conversations you're having where there's unique value added versus what are the types of things we can serve up digitally, and then come up with a prototype and iterate. It's not something you get right out of the bat. You're going to tweak it, see which digital assets resonate, which ones don't. So this is going to be a real-time thing, but I think it's important to put a framework in place to allow you to monitor and tweak it as you go. I think that's what's really most important.
Love it. One more question. This one's coming from Ryan out of Colorado. Ryan just said, when it actually comes to thinking about how people interact with technology, and Ryan, I'm paraphrasing just a little bit, but how do a lot of companies trying to eliminate the people wherever they can. Are you guys taking the same kind of approach? Like, do we try to get to as much of the Amazon type experience where people can use credit cards or upsell, they can just renew real quickly via portal, or how do you balance the people and the technology?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I'll give you my take on it. My take on it is there's always a role for people in this. What's happening here is the value add needs to become different. It's not information sharing. It's insights. It's being deep on the industry, and it's helping them. It's value selling, right? It's helping them solve a problem. So the profile of the individual is changing, and the roles that are getting more commoditized are the ones that are just information sharing or things that can be done or displaced by digital or AI or whatever. I don't see this. I think this is always going to be a 1-2 punch.
Interesting. All right. Yeah. Continue on.
Okay. All right. Go-to-market structure. So once you've lined that out, I think it's really important now to think about what is the structure that you put underneath that to go power it. I'm going to walk you through our evolution and how we evolved it. Again, this is going to look different depending upon what your starting point is and what your rate and pace of investment looks like. I'm just going to give you a sense of what ours look like. Fiscal year 15, so 4 years ago for us, what we had and what we called inside sales was outsourced lead generation. There's about a dozen firms across the globe that were doing inbound lead generation. It really was not a strategic element of our business. And I think part of this was, how do we now look at this model take a new view, given our portfolio, given how fast things were changing in the market, and make this a core capability. So the following year really was, scaling this business up, was bringing it all in-house. So it created about 8 or 9 hubs around the globe to have coverage and flexibility to reach into all the different markets. Still maintained a focus on inbound, but really started getting much more prescriptive around outbound and doing targeted, data-driven outbound, looking at what are our high propensity accounts, what are the buyers we need to be going after. So, I hate the word cold calling, the word cold in it, right? And this was very data-driven, informed calling around who are our most likely prospects. So trying to get that more proactive motion into the engine. And at the same time, the objective was always to create a revenue generating organization. And this was, so we ran some experiments and we looked at areas where we could do more than purely pipeline generation, and took some, bets and said, all right, maybe we can go a little further, go close the deal. And we found pockets where we were able to do that. And we ran some very focused experiments, which gave us some conviction on where could we take more responsibility in the following year. So if we go to the following.
Yeah, real quick before you jump onto that next one. So just a question came in from Tom. Tom just said this outsourced one. You mentioned you started as an outsourced model. And that just was literally using like an outsourced company to build the demand or set the appointments. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
So Tom, he was just asking, what is your opinion? It sounds like you moved away from that, but thoughts on outsourcing sales, business development, good, bad, depends?
I think it depends. It depends on, to me, the culture of your organization and how you work or don't work with those types of organizations. I think it also depends on the type of sale you have. I think it's easier, again, my opinion, that when you have a more transactional model where it's your value prop is well understood, easy to understand, higher velocity, those models may be, a little bit easier to adopt. When you have a longer sales cycle, a more complex solution sale, I don't think those things play as well.
Awesome. Yeah, makes sense. All right, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, so the following year was a pretty transformative year for us. It was really putting us on the map, and we took a bet on a couple of areas where we said we'll take primary quota, take it away from the field, and give it to the inside team, which was pretty, a pretty big deal, just given culturally we've been such a heavy direct sales organization. So we did that in 2 of our North America and Europe, and predominantly focused that on some of our on-premise solutions. We also built out, at the same time, we were in parallel building out a channel ecosystem. And we said, hey, you know what? We could create a real value add for our partners if we, create a digital team that lines up to them and helps them with, demand creation and progression. So we set up a team globally that did that. And we continued to keep the demand generation motion. And, the other piece was this was a really interesting one. We sort of laid ground for a digital pre-sales organization, which is effectively a solutions engineering organization that works across the buckets above, really helping on, demos, POCs, et cetera. How do you do that in a sort of high velocity, cost-effective manner?
Interesting. Yeah, this is such an interesting couple of questions on this third one here. You mentioned you added the inside sales team at this point, obviously. This one's coming from Karen. Why add the inside sales team in now? Was there a reason? Did you feel like that was, quote unquote, just the right time? It sounds like you've always then had kind of a field team that the original kind of people were feeding, appointments, qualified things to. Why was the inside sales added then? It just felt like the right time?
I mean, we were not ready in the prior fiscal year because of the history of the business. There was a ton of hiring going on, a lot of enablement, a lot of training. So in fiscal year 16, we didn't stop with demand generation training. We were looking at full sales cycle training, and then looking at getting them ready to be salespeople and some of them still remained, kind of, and it sort of self-selected out. So we grew headcount, but a lot of the people we put into those roles were in a demand generation role in the prior year, and we were skilling them up. We were pushing them to go try to take deals further.
Yep.
And it was a bit of self-selection in some sense.
Makes sense. All right, go ahead.
So, this past year, fiscal year 18, which ended in March, we're up to about 300 people globally. We really kept the mission largely the same structurally. It's inside sales, partner sales, and demand gen. We expanded the mandate on the quota globally. We included our on-premise, our SaaS solutions. We expanded to additional routes to market on the channel side. I think what was most important was we peeled off a separate segment that only partners and inside sales and digital sales could play. And the field was not allowed to play there. So it was true sort of segmentation in what we call the commercial segment, where it was an inside sales and partner motion, which is, I think, a pretty big step in our evolution. And I don't show it here, but then what we've done subsequently is we've split the organization into two. Since you see here, it really has become at critical mass. It has a sales marketing function. So we took the sales pieces here, combined it with our renewals organization, and aligned it with customer success. So you have a full end-to-end view of the customer and the demand generation function. And actually, I kept it, and I moved into marketing, working for our CMO to try to drive tighter alignment with our digital demand creation.
Yeah, you've spurred a couple of comments there. Do you feel like, looks like we got Casey's saying, do you feel like that is best to split, have one leader that oversees demand gen and kind of the sales side, or do you break that up and kind of have your traditional marketing and sales concept, if that makes sense? It's an interesting question, Casey.
Yeah, I mean, having seen it from both sides, I think there's pros and cons to both. Again, there's benefits to having it as part of sales, but I actually think keeping it very aligned with your top of funnel is very important, because that's where a lot of the breakdown is in the demand waterfall, is the handoffs between the digital side and the human side, and bringing it closer together. I think is proven to be very effective for us. Also, I think having it under one leader, it's tough. I mean, I was constantly, if you take, 2 different or 3 different mandates and then multiply that by 4 geographies, it becomes a scale issue at some point as well. So
interesting. That is cool. That is a great slide. An interesting build of transformation as you guys ramped it up to 300, and it was about 3-ish years, right? 30 months. Yeah. 3.
Yeah, about, yep.
A lot. That's a lot of people. Got it. All right. Yeah, let's continue.
All right. I'm going to keep going. So then it dives into, you have your structure in place. It's now about how do you execute with precision and with speed. I'm going to walk you through this framework, which I call it my Rubik's Cube, because it's a 3x3.
I get it.
Like the color.
I get it. I love it. I get it. Yeah, cool.
And it's really, 3 categories, right? Talent, processes, and systems. And I think of it as, where are you on those respective journeys? Are you foundational? Are you ramping? Are you accelerating?
Yep.
And this is really, I think everybody is at a different point in their journey, and hopefully there's somewhere you can say you are on one of these, maybe further along on talent, further back on systems. But this is a framework which I'm just going to dive into a couple of pieces, and then we can spend some more time on that. So first, let me go into talent. My biggest takeaway on this one is, we spent a lot of time talking about the ideal customer profile. Super important to nail that. Equally as important is figuring out what is your ideal rep profile. And I put BDR here, but it could be, if you have a partner sales team, what does that profile look like? If you have a quota carrier, what does that look like for your organization? You have to define that. And I think you have to take into account the business needs, the cultural aspects, all of that. I'll just give you, from our perspective, we were doing college hiring when I came in. I we did not get very good traction with that because of the nature of our sale.
Yeah,
so
yeah, that makes sense.
So we don't do college hiring right now. Doesn't mean it can't work. Doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. Just for us, it didn't. So we look for 2 to 3 years of experience, even for an entry level position. And industry is less important. If somebody's been in a sales type of role or a marketing type of role, that's more important. And I care about, do they have the DNA to succeed? Are they passionate? Do they have learning agility? Are they coachable? And then just as important, are they a good cultural fit? So I gravitate a little bit more to the DNA and cultural fit as long as they have a foundational level of experience. And that model's worked out pretty well for us.
Interesting. Do you feel like, yeah, I mean, it's hiring, getting the right people on the bus is always super important. Do you feel like there's any quick tips? This one comes from Karen, just on the experience seems to be something that people get, like find that kind of profile that works. But God, that softer skill stuff, understanding passion, getting kind of the coachability. Has there been certain ways you've ran the interview, certain thoughts that you've done to be able to get a little closer to finding that DNA and culture fit as you've kind of displayed it there?
Yeah, I mean, some of these are a bit more situational during the interview to see, what do they like to do outside of work? What's their past history been? But we did create pretty structured interview guides that help us understand or tease out examples of where they've exhibited, passion in something they did and what was the outcome, or are there examples in their work history of being able to move across roles or expand their role with learning agility? So we'll look for examples, plus also have a bit more of a structured way of asking for it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's super important. I think the question that seems to be kind of coming through is, to your point, you've got to probably structure. You've got to get some guides in place that actually do give a common way for all of your managers to interview so that you can capture some of those softer skills. Okay, so number one, you kind of went down the people side. What was number two?
Yeah. So number two is if we go down process, I'm going to talk about one of the, attack the leak ASAP. This is the old view of the funnel is inquiry to closed won revenue. It's a linear process.
Okay.
And I think the new view needs to be much more closed loop.
Yep.
And part of the reason we moved, as I said, we moved our BDR org into marketing was to create this closed loop with top of funnel and really looking at where the leakage is. And what I mean by leakage is if you have, 10,000 inquiries and you're only getting, 5,000, you're only getting 500 turning into qualified leads. Like why is it that you are not having a higher yield? And we instrumented a process where we are measuring the conversion rates across the funnel, identified what the key drivers are of the leakage against where those metrics and benchmarks should be, and have a pretty disciplined approach to, all right, what do we need to do? Is it a qualification problem? Is it a lead scoring problem? But this is a real-time, always going type of thing that if done right with a single version of the truth and alignment between sales, operations, and marketing, this really gets a flywheel going. And that's, I think, really, really important to think about.
So you moved this a little bit and found something that you could do to probably most of all make sure nothing was slipping through the cracks. That sounds like that was probably the big takeaway there.
Correct.
How do you, this is a good question that just came in from Tommy. Is there reporting that you really feel like needs to be in place to manage this funnel effectively?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's probably one of the most important aspects of this is a single version of the truth from a reliable data source, whatever that happens to be for your organization. I can't tell you how many times, people would come to the table with different sets of data, things that they pulled on their own, and you spend half the time, talking about whose data is right, not discussing the business. Yeah, we could all attest to that if you sat on one side or the other. I've sat on, as I said, the sales and the marketing side, and it doesn't change unless And what we did was we said there's going to be one sanctioned version of the truth from top of funnel to close on revenue. There's only one. And if we're going to be on this call or meeting, we're going to refer to that data or we're not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And you start doing that, people still try to bring their own, analogies to the table. And, it's one of those things where it's like, that's fine, but that's not what we're going to talk about on this regular cadence.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you have, this is probably just a good quick clarification for Rod here mentioned, just these language, you got MQL and SRL there. What does that stand for? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So, marketing qualified lead. So when you get, inquiry would just be any sort of digital interaction that a customer is going to have with you, or maybe it's through an event or something. We use a lead scoring process to look at, based on fit and behavior, which ones actually should become leads that we go follow up on. So that's what an MQL is.
Got it.
When an MQL comes into the business development team and then is qualified, it would become, after the qualification, it would become sales ready.
Yeah, got it. So sales ready lead, MQL marketing qualified lead. Got that. Okay. Yeah, continue. So that's number 2, and then number 3.
Yeah. So number 3 on systems. So let's talk about the stack. The stack, I think, is a really important one to think about, because there's a lot of technology in the whole sales and marketing space. And I'll tell you, for the first 2 years, I really didn't pay a ton of attention to technology outside of, I would say, sales automation. We use Salesforce. Marketing automation, we use Marketo. But I think it's really important to keep it simple. There's a lot of technology out there. You're trying to enable and ramp people quickly in a market that is dynamic and moving fast. So it's important to keep it simple. So I think of our stack in these 3 buckets, layered on with a system of growth, which for us, we spent a lot of time thinking about what our options are. We decided to partner with InsideSales.com about 18 months ago. And we've had really, really good results on that. From 18 months ago to now, we've doubled our opportunity production per rep by really leveraging the platform and driving the discipline and getting the visibility into what can we do more of and what should we do less of. So I think of it as really these 3 buckets, and really had a good partner in InsideSales.com along the way.
No, appreciate it. Our time is now short. A couple of last questions as you kind of move to the end here. Let's just go while you're on this sales tech stack and maybe how that fits into it. We got a question from Sarah. You've kind of said here sales automation, marketing automation, and then system of growth. Is there something, if someone's starting down the journey of trying to build the tech stack, where would you kind of guide Sarah to start?
I do think it starts. You have to have, I think, some sales automation in place, and I really look at that as, or a CRM. Like, what is your
fair? Yeah.
You need a foundation. You need good data around your customers and your contacts. So, however you do that, I think that's the underpinning for any marketing or anything else you do.
Yeah, that's a good, Sarah. I think that's probably the way he's got it listed here is right. It's kind of get your sales automation, get some marketing pieces in place, and then you move to whether that's an InsideSales.com. You kind of are working down the funnel, right? Engagement tools to try to build opportunities, et cetera. And that's kind of the way that I think he's displayed it here. I think that's maybe an interesting way to think about as you think about getting your tech stack.
Yep.
So, Sid, as we kind of close up here, obviously it's been an interesting transformation. You've been able to see some decent results, not only just from the scaling, but I think from the numbers as well. What would be kind of that summary statement or the leave behind as you leave reps thinking about transformation?
Yeah, I'll just give you some of my takeaways. That's perfect segue here. First, I
honestly did not know that was in there. I did not know that was in there.
That was not rehearsed. It really is about aligning to your buyer. So start there. I think I mentioned it before, but I think that's pretty important. Keep that in mind at all times and pivot that as your buyer needs change, because it's not static. So you have to be constantly in touch and in tune with that. Show quick wins to build the support and get continued investment. I mentioned to you earlier about how we did some pilots and got some, quick wins under our belt that can be referenced across the organization. change management, super important. If you're doing this in a large company, small company, anywhere you're introducing a fundamentally new model, I think you have to really think about and allocate time and energy towards helping people understand why that fits into the strategy and why it's an important aspect of the strategy that they should get behind and support. So change management, I can't underscore that one enough. I spent a lot of time, over half my time in the first wave of this transformation, really focusing on helping a lot of our field leaders understand why this was important to do. Okay. Keep your model as simple as possible and continually iterate. This is by nature a pretty complex model. You have lots of permutations, lots of flavors and ways of doing things. Keep it as simple as you can in the context of your business so you can iterate fast and make changes so that you get to a state where, you know, it fits your business model as effectively as you can. And then last, you know, while you're building, it may be a little bit difficult to prove, you know, immediate results, but identify what are those leading indicators that could help you show business outcomes and ROI. So this doesn't become a science experiment and this becomes a real meaningful contributor to the business. I think it's important to articulate up and down the organization across functions. Hey, we're on the right track. Here's how I know, and here's what I'm doing to make sure we keep going in that direction. So those would be my takeaways, Gabe.
I love it. I love it. There's a couple questions, guys. We will get to those after. We do want to wrap. Beautiful scenery, by the way, on that slide. That almost looks like good old Utah here. You're making me
maybe it was.
You're making me want to get outside. We actually have the fall colors all changed in our mountains here in Salt Lake City. Anyway, I deter there. Sid, thanks so much for joining. Great talk track on transformation. Appreciate you taking the time. For those who are still on and asking that, I got a couple questions here. Certainly do connect with Sid. Sid, a couple people said, is that all right? You can connect with Sid. I'm sure he'll be open to follow-up questions or quick conversations. And then, some of this information, we'll make sure you get it in a digital format. Those who couldn't attend know that you'll be able to see that for the next few days in an on-demand version. So again, Sid, thanks so much for joining. For the audience, have a fantastic day.
Thank you very much.